Let me read to you something from the UK Daily Mail, which is not a newspaper I usually read, but anyway, 2008, interesting article. It is said to have motivated Napoleon, spurred on Mussolini, driven Attila the Hun, and explained Stalin's maniacal lust for power. Now scientists may finally have proof for the short man syndrome, the phenomenon where tiny men overcompensate for their lack of height through acts of aggression. A new scientific study has shown that shorter men are more likely to be jealous husbands and boyfriends than their taller counterparts. Controversy over short man syndrome, or the Napoleon complex, has raged for years. Supporters of the syndrome say that the society's obsession with height forces small men to overcompensate by becoming chippy, more aggressive, and in extreme cases lust power. So look around you, right? Your next Colonel Gaddafi is in the room, and he's likely to be short. The new findings come from two studies carried out at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Their researchers asked 100 men and 100 women how jealous they were in their current relationships. They were given a range of options from not jealous at all to morbidly jealous. Morbidly jealous. I'm so jealous. They were also asked how interested their partners were in members of the opposite sex. Shorter men were far more likely to say they were jealous than taller ones. Ooh. In a second study, 119 males and 230 female students were asked to say how jealous they would be if they were at a party and say their girlfriend or boyfriend flirted with a stranger. Again, taller men were the least jealous, short men the most. New Scientist reports today. By the way, if you're wondering why the women weren't involved in that, I didn't read out that bit, but apparently if you're a tall woman, you have the same problem as a short man. So you could be the next Napoleon. Nah. What is that article saying to us? I don't know. I'm not sure if you'd want to take it too seriously, but I think it's, driving at something deep inside, which is all of us are looking for significance in some sort of way, aren't we? And the article's pointing out, look, maybe if you can't find significance in one area of life, you're going to overcompensate with another area of life. This is the whole Napoleon complex thing. I think about the word significance. Significance, right? It's related to the word sign. All has to do with signs. And what do signs have to do with? It has to do with meaning. Has to do with identity. Has to do with value. So if you have no significance, then it's no sign, right? No meaning, no identity, no value. In a sense, no name. Right? We all need it. We all need significance. We all need meaning, identity, value. Now, different cultures will define what is significant differently. So for some cultures, height, right? For the Asian culture, it doesn't really matter. Yes. Okay, so that's the whole idea. We all need it. Now, we've got here in Luke 19 that we've just heard read out, we've got a man who you see is hungry for significance. Really hungry, desperate for significance. He meets Jesus, and what happens as a result is he's given the only kind of significance that really matters. And it's the kind that I'll argue will transcend culture, and it's the kind that will last forever. So firstly, let's just go back and have a look at this really interesting encounter. His name is Zacchaeus. I'll call him Zach. It's just easier that way. So you first meet him, and the funny thing is, if you've read other parts of the Bible, especially around the people that Jesus meet, you'll know that it's kind of unique how much we know about Zacchaeus. All right, because we know more about him than almost every other person that meets Jesus. So we got there, sentence number 2, have a look there. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. It's surprising that we know his name. All right, a lot of the people who meet Jesus in the accounts, you don't know his name. Now, one of the reasons perhaps that Luke, the writer, the historian, writes his name here is probably because he was well known by the time Luke wrote his account. That means he was probably a member of the early Christian movement. So you've got to actually see that already at the beginning. You've got a hint of the massive turnaround that this man's life is going to have from insignificant to significant. What are the other things we know about him? Well, we know his occupation. Right? We know his occupation. It says that he's a chief tax collector. Now, this is not an insult on the accountants, all right? But tax collectors in the first centuries it was about the lowest job you could have, especially in Jewish society. The reason was, you guys remember when after 2001, 10-year anniversary of September 11, and America sent troops immediately to fight, right, in Afghanistan to oust the Taliban. Within the first few months of fighting, they found an American fighting for the Taliban. Right? It's kind of like our David Hicks. Only for them, they were much more emotionally involved, yeah? Now, when you're an American fighting for the enemy, right, that's not a good position to be. Now, that's the kind of thing tax collectors were. They were collecting taxes on behalf of the occupiers, the Romans, from their own countrymen. And the other thing was, they almost had free reign to overcharge. So they would collect, they would extort, they would use violence, they would use Roman guards to help extort the money from their own people. And they were constantly in communication, in fellowship, in, having meals, sitting down with, cavorting with what Jews considered to be Gentiles, which is non-Jews. So they were ceremonially, religiously unclean. I mean, it's a bit like this. Remember a few years ago, a convicted ex-pedophile. I don't know, he might still be a pedophile, but he was convicted for pedophilia. His name was Dennis Ferguson. I don't know if you remember reading. He was released on parole, and he wanted to move into an area, right? I think it was around the Riot area. And the whole neighborhood kicked up a stink. It's like, we don't want this man in our neighborhood. We don't want him to even live on the same street as us. Right? That level of disgust is the kind of thing that tax collectors got in Jewish society. He was not a popular man. He was socially outcast. Next, we find out that he was short. Okay, verse number 3. He was a short man. Now, it's not just a height thing, right? He's short not just in terms of height. He's short in the eyes of his peers. That's really the significance. He is insignificant in the eyes of the people around him, in his society, being a tax collector. Another point of view, though, you might want to say that he is probably a classic Napoleon complex guy. I read out that article about short people needing to overcompensate. Well, this guy probably did have that sort of thing going on. I mean, we find out that he was not just a tax collector, but he was a chief tax collector. He wasn't just rich, he was wealthy. Right? He was actually very successful in his career. See, he must have worked really hard to climb that tax collector, career ladder to compensate, I reckon, for his lacks in other ways. I mean, he was a short man. He probably felt neglected all his life. He wanted to compensate. He's saying, well, I'm not tall. I may not be, the guy that the gals go for. I'm not the guy you look at and really look twice at, except maybe to laugh at. I'm not popular, but hey, you know what? I don't need to be, because I found my niche. I found my area of life where I can be successful. And sure, it's not going to win me friends, but I got money. See, that's Napoleon complex in operation. And I got to wonder if, maybe not to that extreme, but is that us in some sort of way? I mean, is that you? I can see it with me. Let me just ask you a question. When you feel unhappy about your life or circumstance, especially when you compare yourself to someone, when you feel unhappy about your life, how do you complete this sentence? Well, at least I. How do you complete that for you? When you feel unhappy, how do you complete that? Well, at least I. Is it, well, at least I have a good home? Well, at least I've got money? Well, at least I'm in a good uni degree? Well, at least I've got a future ahead of me? At least I've got a boyfriend? At least I've got a girlfriend? At least I go to church? At least I'm not as bad. How do you complete that sentence? How much security, in other words, do you place in that? You see, when you feel insignificant, what is that thing that you use to compensate? Because I think we all do that, don't we? We all take comfort in something that makes me feel like I'm someone, even if I can't compete with all the other things that other people have. It's a bit of Zacchaeus going on. All right, so Zacchaeus, he had, from one perspective, nothing, but from another perspective, he didn't care because he made up for it. He overcompensated. But even that level of significance that he had in his career, well, it wasn't enough. Look how desperate he was. Sentence number 3. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran ahead, he climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Now, you know the difference between a fan and a groupie, yeah? I mean, fans will, put posters up, buy all the music, talk about the band. Groupies will go and buy every concert ticket that this band is performing in the country. So I have a friend like that when it came to Backstreet Boys. All right, she literally went from the Sydney concert, flew to the Melbourne concert, and went to the airport to try and meet them, slept out overnight. That's the kind of thing. There's a lot of Apple groupies. Every time there's a new Apple product, they're like out on George Street, lining up the night before. That's a groupie. That's different to a fan. Groupies are desperate, yeah? Desperate people. I know some of you probably cried this morning because the news was that Steve Jobs stepped down as CEO of Apple, right? That groupies are desperate. And this guy was desperate. He ran up ahead. He was a groupie, okay? He wasn't just content being part of the crowd. He knew that he couldn't see Jesus. He ran up ahead. By the way, running was very undignified for Jewish men, okay? Because they didn't wear pants. They kind of wore those, right? So you run, you suddenly wind blows, and it's a bit like Marilyn Monroe, okay? And imagine he's climbing a tree. Like, that's revealing more, isn't it? Okay, so that's what he did. It was very undignified. It was almost comical, but he was that desperate. He wanted so much to meet someone who might give him more. Now, people would have thought, what a loser. I mean, he was already kind of pretty low in their view. They would have just, okay? I mean, that was probably what was going on. But you see, when you want Jesus more than any other, you're willing to be a fool to get him. And at this point, I guess it's worth saying that a lot of times, in my experience of talking to people who are not yet Christians, and some of them are actually, you might be pretty close. One of the obstacles that really often prevents people from coming to Jesus, even though they're intellectually satisfied with all the answers, is pride. Right? Pride is often such a big obstacle. And religious people who think they're good, are often best at that. We want everything to be tame and containable and respectable. But here's the truth, friends. Sometimes Jesus will make you a little bit crazy. Right? Yeah, you're going to put on Pac-Man suits and walk around uni. No, you're going to laugh and cry and dance and sing, and you might be on your knees sometimes. You might give away your life. You might give up your uni, your career. Right? That's the kind of thing that happens. See, what's the problem of being a fool for Jesus if you understood, as the Bible says, Jesus made you, he loves you, and he knows you. But we'll come to that in a moment. But this is what Zacchaeus is doing. Right? He comes to Jesus with abandonment. He makes a fool of himself. And what he's actually doing is he's saying, all those things I used to take security in, I used to feel comfortable about or take pride in, I'm willing to let it all go. My self-respect, whatever is left, let it all go in order to gain something more. And I want to say to you today, if you are searching for meaning in your life, especially in relation to Jesus, you got to do that, not in exactly that way, but you got to do that to in some way in your life. In a sense, God has got to break you before he can remake you. Right? Don't let pride be what stops you from coming to Jesus. So he's desperate for more, but the next, point number 3, he comes face to face with Jesus, face to face with more. And what happens is Jesus gives Zacchaeus a new significance. Now, how does he do that? Firstly, he gives him a name. Well, he calls him by name. Look at verse 5. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So Zacchaeus came down at once and welcomed him gladly. You notice who took the initiative, all right? I mean, Jesus, with the crowd around him, he could have just walked straight past. There would have been nothing Zacchaeus would have been able to do. He could have cried out. He could have called, hey, Jesus, don't forget me. But people would just tell him to shut up, all right? But no, what happens was this. Jesus walks up to him. Jesus walks up to him, and here's the thing. Jesus knew his name. How did Jesus know his name? Maybe, probably even, that he was just very well known. He was such a dirtbag that everyone knew him, and Jesus knew him before coming into that. But I think there's a hint that there's something more than that. Remember, your name is your significance. Jesus knew his name and called his name out, not just as someone who might have heard about him, but I think deeper than that. Remember, Jesus is God come to earth as a man. God the Creator knew his creature. And as God comes to his creation, this man who other people considered insignificant, Jesus says, others might not notice you. Others might not want to know you. Others would be ashamed to say your name, but you know what? I'm not. Calling him by name was to say, I accept you. With all your brokenness, just as you are.